The thing is, the advice that one would give if one were to offer medical advice or nutrition advice or lifestyle advice in relation to the vast majority of those diseases can actually come back to a few very simple behaviors. And they're the things that we summarize all the time, don't smoke, don't drink or minimize alcohol consumption, make sure you're getting enough sleep, make sure that you're eating plenty of fruits and vegetables, try to limit your saturated fat intake, eat plenty of fiber, eat plenty of protein, and manage your body weight, and as a result of that, obviously your calorie intake over time. And if you do all those things while exercising regularly and doing all the other good lifestyle things, you'll be doing as much as you can probably to minimize your risk of all of those respective diseases. And people like to have specific prescriptive advice for each respective condition, but the thing is, if you actually look at them, there's huge crossover. Because if you look at, for example, renal or kidney disease, often there's a strong link there with risk factors for cardiovascular disease, such as through hypertension, so high blood pressure, or through high blood glucose, for example, if someone's got uncontrolled diabetes. So you can see that these things start to link together. So it's very difficult to kind of parse out what you would do for risk of one condition versus risk of another condition. Now, with that said, there's obviously more potent risk factors for each respective condition or cause of death, such as in the case of stroke, like high blood pressure is just really, really important. So if you can manage blood pressure, reducing salt intake in particular in the diet, that's a very potent pathway to address there. Whereas with diabetes, for example, the primary thing that you can do to reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes is to manage your body weight and ensure that you're not gaining excess body fat over time. Like that's probably the biggest modifiable thing there. And it effectively the only way that has been demonstrated to reverse type 2 diabetes or put it into remission is the loss of body weight because of mechanisms that we've discussed in the obesity series previously. So you can see that there's individual pathways that you might want to target more than others. But at the same time, we obviously want to consider all of these conditions together and the risk of all these conditions together, because what we really care about is all cause mortality. We care about, like, I don't want to save myself from stroke risk if it's going to lead me to die from a heart attack. That doesn't make a difference to me. The good thing is there's huge crossover. And if you take care of everything, you're probably reducing your risk as much as you can. So that's the kind of the starting point there.
Yeah, 100%. There's basically healthy habits and unhealthy habits, right? And, it makes sense that if you minimize your unhealthy habits, it kind of improves your health in general through a variety of mechanisms, depending on obviously what exactly we're talking about. For example, you were talking about blood pressure there, and you're like, okay, one of the interventions we could potentially do here is lower our salt, right? Our sodium intake. Now, that has a knock-on effect of also affecting stuff like, potentially the kidneys, right? And you're like, okay, well, I was doing it for stroke risk, and now it's, lowered my kidney disease risk. It's also lowered my stomach cancer disease risk, right? And then I'm maybe swapping out food sources because, I'm normally eating, I don't know, packaged food. Now I'm swapping out food sources to have, more fresh fruit and veg as a result of that. And because I wanted to get, I don't know, more potassium in the diet. And now all of a sudden you're eating more fiber and, your metabolic health is now improving. And then also your, colorectal cancer risk is going down because now you're eating more fiber, right? So there are all these different like knock-on effects by making small changes, and this is one of those things where, again, it kind of comes back to laying the foundation of just good healthy habits, and all of a sudden you're protecting yourself against or potentially preventing a variety of things, right? So I suppose before we get into just kind of any specifics in terms of what we're trying to do with our health, it makes sense to just go through like the fundamentals. Like, what are we actually doing, right? So we have control over a few things, right? We have control over training, right? Obviously, to whatever extent you have control over your own training, you have control over your training, right? Now, obviously, you have to make time for that. Work commitments, family commitments, whatever that can potentially pose a barrier. But for the vast majority of people, they can get 2 to 3 training sessions done a week, right? That's 2 to 3 hours out of your week. most people can do that, even if it's stuff, just in the house, right? Most people can find 2 to 3 hours to get something done, right? Now we could obviously, jazz it up and be like, right, this is the guidelines, the recommendations for exercise. It would be, beneficial to at least hit those. However, again, that's not always possible, right? But we have control over training. We have more control over our diet. And again, there are obviously barriers to that. And again, we've talked about them previously on different shows, different episodes, I should say, in terms of socioeconomic status, the food environment you find yourself in your local area, whatever, right? But we have some control over our diet. We can still make better decisions, better swaps, so that we have improved health, right? So we have control over training, control over our diet. We have some control over our recovery, in terms of we can focus on getting enough sleep, right? Most often than not, you can try to get that. Now obviously, if you're working 3 jobs, it's not exactly within your control, but you still have a lot of control over that. Stress management then as well, we have some control over that as well. It's not as controllable as, say, training, but we do have some practices that we can engage in to move the stress, whatever, cycle in a better way, right? So I suppose in this episode, we're going to focus mostly on the nutrition and general health practices we do, because we've already talked about training, right? So I'm going to take it as a foundation, a given, that you guys know that we are training, right? Because again, we're talking about this from our perspective, what we're doing. So you guys know that we're training, right? We're both training, 4 to 10 times per week, right? So again, that's our perspective. Now, do we think that everyone needs to be training 4 to 10 times per week? Yeah, probably not. I would be pretty happy if someone said to me that I'm training 2 to 3 times per week. I'd be like, cool, you're at least hitting your foundational health related goals. Maybe layer on some walking on top of that. Boom, happy days.